Hello and welcome to the Revanchist podcast. Lost count of what episode we're on now. It's like 5 or 6, something like that. And today,
Fucked it already. It's fucked already.
no, it's not. I'm just giving some pretext. I'm trying to solidify as to we've done so much material now that we've just kind of lost count of how much we've done. We're hard at work.
Our brains can't cope with
I
it.
know, too much. Anyway, today with us we have, as always, Connor.
Hey, what's up?
And Ben.
Good evening.
Good evening. Right, okay. What are we going to be discussing first today?
So the first thing we'll be discussing is obviously the incident with Henry Vincent, the robber, and some of the events that have transpired after, obviously. Would you like to give a brief rundown on what's happened?
Yeah, go on. I think Jacob's probably the best for that.
Okay, well, so as has been circulating in the media recently is the events with the fella who stabbed a burglar with a screwdriver, and he had to be arrested because he had killed someone.
I think it's important to say it was the burglar screwdriver.
Ah, okay. But yeah,
it was, wasn't it?
I don't know. I just know that he grabbed a screwdriver. He panicked
because there was a struggle. Because he backed him into the kitchen, and there was a struggle. I'm not sure, to be honest, whether it was the burglars or not. I doubt it's even come out if it was or not.
So
he was backed into the kitchen. He was definitely.
Well, a screwdriver in their kitchen.
That's what I was thinking. Don't know. Might have been a handyman. Anyway, so the case is he had to be arrested. I think in the case that he. Killed someone.
That's the investigation. Like, obviously.
But and part of me thinks that was blown out of proportion by the British public, as to say, oh, he's been arrested for defending his home. But
so what's followed after, though, is that the families of the burglar who was killed have put up a shrine on his property, on his fence. It got torn down.
Did you see the video of that bloke, that fat bloke standing on it? Oh my god, how funny it was. I saw that in work today, on the TV in work. I was loudly pissing myself. Yes. It was so funny.
They've now put it back up, and it's got torn down again.
He was pure stamping on it. Like, it was so much discrimination. It was awesome. Good to see it was.
Justified.
So what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the incident? Because obviously the man is now getting death threats. The elderly man. From this family. Yeah, he's getting death threats.
Wow.
So, what is everyone's position? Do you think he... I think we're all going to be in fairly agreement here. Do you think he had the right to defend himself?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Hero.
Yeah.
Like, he's such an example. He's such an example. Like, I think there's always sort of been an air of uncertainty about your rights in this country to defend yourself, and I think a man like that, at his age, apparently his wife was in the house with dementia, to defend his property and himself and his wife. I think it's just brilliant, and I think it's cleared up a lot of uncertainty that was surrounding situations like that. There's always conversations in the UK about what sort of force can you use if a burglar comes in your house, and an example.
I mean, I have seen, I have in fairness seen someone who's done excess, but I think that,
what I don't think you should be able to do is if the burglar leaves your house and you chase him down and tie him up and light him on fire, that's like outrageous.
There was an incident as a little, just not like this one, because I think the guy was, he processed the situation. He decided, I got to defend my family. Just pure instinct, adrenaline. I reckon, he obviously wasn't thinking about, what's appropriate and what is inappropriate force. He took the guy down. I doubt he intended to kill the guy, probably just to wound him, and the guy died after, because he was taken into hospital. It was probably
There's actually a guy on, what's the show called? With fucking Philip Schofield and Holly Willoughby.
Good Morning, Britain.
It's not Good Morning, Britain.
Yeah, like something like that. And This Morning, that's it, is it? Yeah, whatever. And a guy was on there in a similar case, and basically, you can see us on YouTube, and he was actually let off as well, but his was far more excessive. Basically, like, a known sort of criminal was like outside the house very late at night, and so the guy went out and Yeah, no, he was threatening the guy, the homeowner. So the homeowner just like sort of went outside and beat the shit out of him, and he was let off. But his was far like he didn't even enter the house. He was just in the garden. But he was saying like he said like get back in your house before I kill you or something. And he's a big fella, this lad, the lad that beat him up. So he just went out and like kept smashing him in the face on the ground.
There was one incident I know where the opposite, where this guy, he knew these kids were going to apparently rob his house, from what I remember, but he actually like set a trap in the house, and he was waiting there. He blew the guy away. He killed the guy, and the girl was with him, but he was like sadistically taunting them both, and like then he killed her, going on like, recording the whole thing, and he put it on into a courtroom, and he was like, look, here's me defending myself, and it did not fly. It come across like he was an absolute psychopath, and he went down for that. And I think he should have, because if you watch the footage, it's like, no, he was taking real sadistic pleasure in like killing them. It wasn't just like, I've got to defend myself. It was like,
I was thinking, I bet that old man, whatever his name is, I bet he feels guilty, but I bet at the same time he'd say, I'd do it again if I had to. Do you know what I mean? It's that sort of attitude. Like, I wish it didn't happen. I feel bad, but if I had to do it again and defend my wife, I'd do it.
We haven't actually got any, look into his sort of mental state after this. He's obviously extremely stressed,
yeah,
especially with these fucking clowns putting up memorials on his fence. I mean, what a guilty reminder.
Look, I reckon, you shouldn't punish family in it. So, I feel sorry for his kid and whatnot. I've seen there was letters saying like to daddy and shit. So I imagine the kid's young. But why are they putting it on the guy's fucking fence? I'd rip it down too. I'd rip it down, burn it, and light cigars off the smoke.
I mean, look. It's not like he was some innocent little guy caught in the crossfire here. He fucking he was robbing the house.
Supposedly was like a career criminal kind of thing as well.
As if that justifies it. Hey, I'm a career serial killer. Can I get some tributes put up to me?
Can I get some free stuff?
But no, it's just appalling. I think they should have they're welcome to build a shrine, but it's not on his private property.
From London, though, innit? They're just scumbags. Fucking people from London are retards, aren't they?
All of London.
As I sit in London, speaking to you.
But you can tell the type of bloke that Robert was, just a cockney wanker.
Fair enough.
You can see by the look of him. He looked like an arsehole, though, didn't he? Come on, now. He did. He looked like a right arsehole.
He looked like a guy who was robbing houses.
He did. He looked like a knob. Can you say people look like a knob? I don't know, but you could tell by the look of him. People might say that about me, but those people will be wrong.
Oh, well.
But anyway, yeah.
No,
that changes it.
No, I mean, it does raise issues about, like, defense and stuff, but I think he was fully within his rights to defend the home
I was bloody pissing myself when I saw that fat bloke stamping on the flowers. It was just so much like anger, and it was bloody brilliant to us. It was good. I was thinking it's good to see finally a happy story in the news.
A fat guy jumping on flowers. Story of the day.
Such comic relief.
You listen in closely and you realise there's a voice buffer, and it finally comes through, and you hear the voice properly. The flowers are turning the frogs gay, the chemtrails.
It was all a plant by Alex Jones. He put the screwdriver in the kitchen.
Apparently, he was a traveller. Reading now.
Who was he? I don't know.
I'm not being a dickhead. No, I'm being serious. Yeah, apparently he was a traveller.
The killer?
The robber.
Yeah.
We have the article on it if anyone wants to read it.
Yeah.
From a lab Bible.
The
true source.
Unbelievable.
The true
Great
source
of
news.
Right, family of Henry Vincent rebuilt trash shrine only to have it tore down again. The shrine for the burglar killed by the pensioner, Mr. Richard Osborne Brooks, has been rebuilt by his grieving relatives only for it to be trashed again. Images show people cutting down the flowers and other tributes left to Henry Vincent, who died in hospital after being stabbed in a struggle with 78-year-old Richard Osborne. Since Vincent's death, a number of floral tributes, cards, and balloons have been left just yards away from the home where the burglar was fatally stabbed. However, it didn't take long for angry neighbours to protest against the tributes and begin dismantling them, and according to The Sun, an angry female was seen with scissors cutting the flowers and balloons down just hours after they were placed. One woman did not want to be named, told the Daily Mirror that should not be there. It is someone's fence. It's all a bit over the top. It's a bit out of order. The man should not have burgled the property in the first place, obviously. Another long-term resident said they should have taken over the road with this. They have taken over the road with this, but he can't move back. It doesn't seem fair. The Sun reports that distraught family members then rebuilt the shrine this afternoon, but just half an hour later, bouquets were then being hacked down once again by people that were left in a heap on the floor.
It's obviously going to just keep happening, isn't it? So
This the death of this robber, I would put this as big a disaster as the Hindenburg.
I love Hindenburg disaster references.
But yeah, I think it's the fact that he's had to move home. I mean, what an absurd thing. Defending your home, you have to now leave it for your safety. And to receive death threats for defending yourself. There we go. So that's the story. It's still obviously developing. I know he has police protection now, the old man. But
You've seen the photo of him that the media keep using of the old man?
yeah, the one with the pint in his hand.
Yeah, two pints, a pint in each hand. He seems like such a legend.
He recounts you old war stories, especially ones about the Hindenburg disaster. He was there. But all right, yeah, I think that's. I don't know if there's anyone wants to add any points about it.
It's just a little interesting way to start the video, I think. Should we move on to some of the more questionable topics?
Bigger topics.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's go.
So
Which one are we moving on to?
South Africa, I think. It's what I got next in line.
South Africa. Super duper.
Okay, so for those who may not know, South Africa taking farms from white is justified because it's not really their land, says EFF spokesperson. So a couple of journalists have been to South Africa recently, one being Lauren Southern and Katie Hopkins went as well, but she ended up getting arrested for
Why?
possession of ketamine, I think.
What?
Yeah,
That is true.
Yeah, something along the lines of that. And left-wing media had a field day over that.
Is that true?
Yeah, it's true. But
That is
But
true.
it's in the context of, like, it wasn't like she was sniffing ketamine or anything. It was just like she had it in her possession for some reason or not. So yeah.
Hang on. What other context could there be?
Okay, let's look it up. Shall we?
That's insane. I never knew that.
Ketamine on Twitter in South Africa. Let's have a little look.
Joe, I don't like Katie Hopkins anyway. How about you
No,
two?
I don't like her. Katie Hopkins collapsed after taking ketamine in South Africa. Oh, she wasn't arrested. She collapsed after taking ketamine in South Africa.
Well, there we
How
go.
takes ketamine in South Africa?
Specifically in South Africa.
Yeah, but why would you do it there? Like, come on, nutter.
Do you think like she started hallucinating as she wanders around? She starts seeing scenes from The Lion King. Hey, Simba.
Anyway, back to the original topic as we've gone offhand.
Yeah.
So, South African white farmers are being persecuted in South Africa by what is, I guess, a black majority government. I'm sorry, I had to say it. The EFF and
the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters Party.
Yeah. And
Is that what it stands for? I heard about it on that Reggie Yates documentary in South Africa.
Yeah, what
It
they
sort of gained momentum at the time then.
What they believe is that basically they have the right, they've called successfully on the Constitution that they can redistribute property on racial grounds.
It's basically the alt-right.
only the other way around.
It's basically it's actually I can't. I think it's communist on the sound. It does. It's communist, but at the
It's
same
super
time, it
authoritarian.
is.
It's
Yeah.
fascistic.
But
Distribution of land sounds communist, but it just sounds more alt-right to me, doesn't it? Like
yeah,
It's the racial element to it which stands out.
the racial, yeah. You find with these racial-based parties, it always seems to be the main driving force. Like Richard Spencer in Age, he admits that like he's not really interested in economics. He would adopt socialism if needed.
Despite this, many of the left actually have no problem with what's going on, though,
Or just
because they see it.
look through it and just don't think it is a thing.
They have no concern for the statistics, and they just see it very much through the lens of it's white people, they shouldn't be there, therefore it is okay for them to die, essentially. That's been the view. So, not exactly the most
Is that really? Are people really being like that? I mean, I know it's like ignored in the mainstream media, but like,
Well,
yes,
surely people aren't like that. Like,
we have
South African refugees
have
are being taken in by Australia.
yeah, I
have-
saw that Avi Yemeni video.
Yeah,
You,
we're gonna
linked.
have a look at that later as well.
we have
nice.
some little videos ready of it, but they are completely complacent. I mean, to me, it seems completely paradoxical. As I just remember, whatever happened to the whole non-violence aspect of the left, the whole live and let live, whatever happened to all of those kind of things that it built itself around.
Like Martin Luther King is a genuine hero, but just he's been like by the left. I feel in America at the minute.
Do you reckon Martin Luther King would have voted Trump?
Ooh,
No, I don't think so.
what do you
I think it's
I
fair
reckon
to
he
say
would have abstained.
wouldn't.
Why he wouldn't have voted?
Yeah, do you reckon he would have voted for Hillary as well? Did he vote for?
He wouldn't have voted for Hillary. No
I mean,
chance.
who did he had? He had
I imagine he would have spoken and tried to get the best deal he could from every party. I imagine he would have used his own political influence.
I mean, he had the benefit. It was
know.
Kennedy was the president when he was around, wasn't it?
He was against, but Kennedy's right wing.
Well, yeah,
Democrat or
he's
not.
basically what we are pretty much.
Libertarian, yeah. But then, except Kennedy's pro-war, though, isn't he? So not like that.
But
it's kind of hard to give a full measure of Kennedy's presidency, though, because obviously it was cut very short. But generally, his actual work in the civil rights was stunted for a long time. It wasn't until after his death that actually after they pushed through a lot of the civil rights.
Johnson, was it, followed him?
Yeah, Johnson. But Johnson is not remembered fondly, even though he was the president where it all got pushed through because of his involvement with the Vietnam War.
Yeah, but that was Kennedy's problem as well. Vietnam's just a mess anyway.
Yeah, but he died. It's because it's obviously just
'Cause he died.
timing. It's just timing, a lot of it.
Yeah.
anyway, should we return to
That's
the matter at hand?
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
give you the article I read. So, the national spokesman of a key South African opposition party has said redistributing land from white farmers without compensation is justified because it is not really their land. I'm not going to even try and pronounce that name. Ndlozi told the independent white farmers descended from Dutch and English colonial invaders have taken the land through a violent crime against humanity. That was awfully read. I don't know.
Would you consider this the third Boer War?
That's interesting. Only the tides
Isn't it?
have changed,
Yeah, I know.
and there's two completely separate
Now they're
parties.
the now they're the bad
fighting against
guys.
each other. Yeah. Mr. Ndlozi is one of the most senior officials in economic freedom fighters, which put forward a successful notion last month calling on the government to consider amending South Africa's constitution to make clear that it is within the authorities' power to redistribute property on racial grounds, which is the same thing as what the Nazis did with the Jews.
I mean, I've got a little point to make in the sense that
That's
they're
not-
talking
But this
They-
party's not in power, though, is it? How close are they?
they're pretty powerful. They've influenced policy.
yeah.
They have influenced government policy. They talk about colonial invaders and they mention the Dutch and the English. I mean, at what point do you not just think, though, these people who are being targeted now, these farmers haven't done anything.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not even, you know, if we're talking their fathers, and, you know, every colonial incident. I mean, you could make a case then in that case that the Irish in America, or you could make the Italians who are now rooted in there, you know, these colonial things, these people who have, or immigrational things, they eventually assimilate into the culture. You know, especially if we're talking over hundreds of years here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Boers are South African. Like, they are South African. There's no doubt about it. It's not that. Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
I don't. I mean, for starters, violence under these circumstances is insane. They shouldn't need to use violent
Crazy,
murder
innit?
at this
How
point.
can, like, and why, like, it's mad, like, world leaders and political figures, like, always outrage at Trump and his mean tweets. And then, like, there's actually a Nazi party in South Africa. No one gives a shit.
I wouldn't call them.
Nazis,
I'm not sure if they're a Nazi party, but they're
fascist, at least.
definitely
They are.
they're definitely racially you know, they have a strong racial ideology. They're definitely pushing their agenda.
Well, if they were in power and they would genocide against whites.
They would either, from the sound of it, they pretty much just want them out. I'm not sure whether murder they would go as far as, but they want the land and they want
The
it
rugby team
clear.
would be terrible if that happened.
They want it clear
Oh.
that, you know, they say that it's their land and that's it. So, more living room, greater land for Germans. Sounds a little familiar.
So, reason on.
It's weird.
Sure.
It's weird. It's like quite untalked about in the mainstream media.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I guess it's because of, you know, narrative fulfillment. I mean,
It's because it runs.
it's really being concentrated on by right-wing media groups, but left-wing just completely ignoring it. It makes sense.
That's really weird. That is.
It's because it runs.
Yeah, but they can't be.
contrary.
Surely they can't be that ideological. Like,
Here's
how are they not speaking about it?
here's my thoughts on it.
It's
my
not even
theory.
like some bum country. It's South Africa. Like,
It's because
it's the most important country in sub-Saharan Africa, and things like that are happening, and it's not being spoken of.
It's because it runs counter to the main narrative, and that's the issue.
Yeah.
I just can't believe they do have that much of a narrative, though. Like, that's nuts. That's insane.
Well,
It's
in that.
It's the usual us versus them, and because they have such a strong us versus them, they cannot in any way acknowledge the flaws or anything of, say, an ethnicity or a religion or anything like that. They can't criticize or acknowledge the flaws because then they run the gauntlet of essentially they turn on each other, begin the cannibalization process, which I think is inevitable, but they're going to ignore it.
I think they'd be able to criticize a political party.
Apparently not.
Nope, they won't do it. They won't do it. Anything that runs contrary to what they perceive, it's not going to happen. And that's the attitude.
Have you seen anything at all about it in the mainstream?
The only reason
Hardly
reason
anything.
I know is because I've been following the journalists who went there on Twitter.
Same.
I followed Lawrence
Same.
Owen, that's it.
The only reason I know is Seven and Hopkins, Yemeni.
They don't want to know. They do not want to know. And they don't want to know because it runs counter to their message. And they can't look at it through, you know, they don't look at individuals. They look at whole blanket things. The world is a black and white thing. There's no way for them to, and I think that's speaking both sides to a degree, but I think there is, you know, I'm speaking specifically on the sort of left side at the moment, or its current incantation. And I just don't think that it's got the balls, the commitment, anything like that to seriously critique and look at itself and reflect and acknowledge the flaws. You know, it's not like it's obviously, because the first thing they'd say, I know if there was anything brought up, they'd say, hey, not all blacks. We know that. We're well aware of that. We are well aware not all blacks are going out killing people. We know. But we can still acknowledge that a party in Africa has genocidal tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
There's people in that video. Are you going to show the video?
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah.
All right. So, here we go.
Can I ask you a quick question? Sure. So you're obviously advocating that we have more refugees. Do you feel the same about the white South African refugees? Should we be inviting them here as well?
No.
Why are you hanging out with your Nazi mate over there?
we're just not doing that at the moment. We're keeping our Nazi down. Today I got my kipper on, so I'm going to be less Nazi. South African farmers, you know, the ones that are getting raped, robbed, murdered.
No, that's ridiculous.
Are you denying what's happening in South Africa?
Yes, I'm denying it.
Why not?
They've got their own country and they stole their land.
So do the
anyway.
Syrians. Really? The white South Africans now that are about 30 years old stole land.
No, but that's the history of the place. That's the history.
So they
of South
deserve
Africa.
what? A genocide? Can you sign our white South African? We want to bring in the refugees from South Africa. Are you
I
happy?
would prefer if the Rohingya came here first.
Why is that? Is that because they're brown? Will you support our petition to bring down the white South Africans? Why is that funny?
I know you.
Do you know me?
I do know you. I like you.
You like me?
I do.
So you're going to sign our petition? Now we have people that will integrate easily. They speak the language, they share similar cultures.
That's
Why
racist.
wouldn't? It's actually racist to not accept them because they're white.
No, it's racist. There's no such thing as reverse racism. You should know that.
I didn't say reverse racism. Will you sign a petition for the white South African
Drop
farmers?
dead, you're a fascist. Drop dead, you're a fascist. Drop dead, you're a fascist.
A tolerant lefty. Last year we had a priority for Syrian refugees. Did you have a problem with that?
Absolutely, because they were Christian.
Because we have enough problems with our current immigration program. In fact, I would.
with them?
Have you been to Melbourne lately?
I live in Melbourne.
Oh, great. Do you know about that Sudanese crime wave?
It's a beat up by the media.
Are you willing to match whatever we did with the special intake for the Syrian refugees last year? Are you willing to match that with white South African farmers?
I think you're twisting the issues.
No, I'm asking a pretty straightforward question. Actually, a white farmer is double as likely to get killed than a South African
where are
policeman.
Your stats from?
It's their own government stats. Why don't you look at it before? You know, the problem here is that you're jumping to these conclusions because you are biased because they are white. That in itself is racist. Brother, are you against the white South African refugees? You don't want the white South African refugees?
I don't want to talk to you, man, because you're a fucker.
I'm a fucker.
Yeah, go away. Don't threaten me. Don't threaten me. Don't threaten me. You threaten me. Okay, man, I'm fine. I'm fine.
Oh, mate, I needed you. God bless. I was worried.
You were close to me.
God bless Victoria, please, except for that one that's on his period. But everyone else.
It's pretty much done.
He's a racist and a
People
fascist.
will get the idea. So can go follow Avi Yemeni on Twitter, on YouTube there, from that video.
So that's it. You can pretty much just see the absolute delusion, I think. Appalling. I think it's appalling that there's such
Can't
a
believe you were
tolerance.
denying it.
Just a tolerance for violence, you know, completely contrary to the sort of views that I believe the left's supposed to embody. Just endorse violence, you know, for the sake, you know, because it's a racially based violence, but unnecessary. Imagine you were one of these farmers. What would you do in these circumstances? What would you do? I know what I do. I'd burn my farm down, I'd burn my crops, and I'd leave.
Yeah.
I wouldn't stick
You have to
around.
leave.
Why would
But then-
anyone...
They're all gonna leave. The more white people leave, the more percentage of votes this was it AFF? You
Yeah,
say?
that's true.
The more they'll gain.
No, I mean, at the end of the
Well,
day,
if there's no
you know,
incentive for them to
what
get
does
rid
that
of-
matter? There was plenty of Jews voting
Yeah,
against
good
Hitler as well, and that didn't matter. Look how that turned out for them. Frankly, I think their personal safety I prioritize. They want to vote in a racially charged party, whatever, but just get the people out, I think. I'm against
Crazy this is happening, isn't it?
I'm against any sort of violence like that. Any sort of violence.
What a shithole of a country anyway, isn't it? Why would you want to be there? I suppose you can get a nice house with it, but what a shithole. Always been a shithole.
Yeah, I think we kind of take for granted how good the United Kingdom is.
Oh, fucking too right we do. Like, don't get me wrong, it's soft as shit. But fuck me, we're lucky. Unbelievably. I'm grateful every day for my life and where we live and shit.
I just think the whole thing, I think...
There's places worse in South Africa, and like look how shit that is. Do you know what I mean?
There's definitely some real poverty-stricken areas. Definitely.
That whole country's a shithole, to be honest. It
From
is
personal
just fucking
experience.
shit.
Is this going off that Reggie Yates documentary still?
But yeah, I
yeah.
mean,
But even Reggie, like, do you know, I like Reggie and I like his documentaries, but fucking, even he was sort of struggling to see that there was racism towards whites. He didn't want to admit it, man. It was fucking weird. As I say, I like Reggie, and like, he was So he spent his whole documentary and he'd met with members of that party and people that thought that way. He'd been to white slums and they spoke about, the prejudices against them. And he was just sort of... There was one bloke in the slum, literally one bloke, saying, "Oh, this is my own fault because I made the wrong choices." And then he's like, "Yeah, I think that's everyone's problem. They're just failing to admit it." Like, why are you listening to one bloke? Like, it's nuts.
No,
it's absolutely fucking nuts.
What it is that it's... These kind of issues cause a massive identity crisis for the left, I think, because here they are confronted with something that's obviously racist, it's obviously abhorrently evil, but they just can't admit it, because if they do,
Reggie couldn't admit it. Like he basically saw it all. But there was one part where there was a white slum. Have you seen the documentary, Jacob?
No. But yeah.
There's one part where he visits a white slum and he hears music. And the white slum, the whites point to a group, and it's a group of black they call them middle class teenagers, and they're having a party. And Reggie goes over there, and they're all drinking, playing music, whatever, just like chilling. And then he says, "Do you know there's a white slum over there?" And the guy's like, "No, there's no white people in slums." And he pewered up, and Reggie's like, "Look, they're just over there." And he's like, "Nah, you're lying to me. That's not true." And he's saying it like on camera. And then like after Reggie sees all this, at the end of the documentary, he still concludes that he doesn't believe there's racism towards whites. He just thinks that they've fallen across a bad situation and they're blaming the government.
You see, it's because...
And he starts bringing up apartheid.
It's because they can't understand, they can't comprehend the idea that when the tables turn, of course it's going to be human nature.
You have to ask them the question, are black people disadvantaged in the United States and the UK? And if their answer is yes, then they'd have to persuade you how whites aren't in South Africa. Because... fuck me. Well, like, how can the human brain work in that way to see prejudices against black people in the UK and USA and not against whites in South Africa when it's... Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you think we can start asking for an apology for the treatment of the white farmers in a couple of years? Say it gets worse. Can I start counter asking? So every single argument.
Yeah, but what about the white farmers in South Africa?
So what happens is...
I might start bringing it up in every argument I have, to be honest.
So what we can do is...
I was thinking about it already.
Regular argument.
Because if I've got to apologise for slavery, which I never did, I wasn't a slaver. I think slavery's abhorrent. But if I've got to take personal responsibility for something I never did or I never agreed with, then can the person who I assume has nothing to do with the attacks on the white farmers in Africa, can he apologise to me? We can just have a permanent convo with us both going to each other. I'm sorry. There's no easy way to say it. I'm sorry to you.
Actually, for every single conversation that you ever have with this person.
That's it. All we say to each other every day we see each other will just be, "I'm sorry," and we'll walk away.
Alternatively, you simply...
The problem always comes to just collectivism. So many of these problems, like not just the black and white side of like parties being racially driven, but the whole like white should apologize for this and all that caper.
You can only take simple responsibility for yourself, and that's it. You can't do it for the entire collective. It's unfair.
See, within my mind, I try and approach everything through individualism. I avoid blankets as much as possible, I think, because the minute you start blankets, that's when you get these sweeping statements. That's when you make this, you start hearing that all whites are racist, or you start hearing all of this group are thieves, or all of this group are not superior, or all of this and that. I look at the individuals. I try and get down, even looking at, say, communism. They take the approach that all corporations, all corporate people are just evil entities. And there are a lot of corporations that exploit, but there's also corporations that do a lot of good, and you've got to try and look individualistically, I think. That's my approach. I try and but yeah, that's what's going on in Africa. It's going great. It's a real party. Book your flights now. You may not come back, but I gotta say, I've just gotta say, what's going on? It's as big a disaster as the Hindenburg.
Right, should we move on to an even bigger disaster?
Bigger than the Hindenburg?
Surely not.
Are you mad?
Well, here it is. Would war against Assad make the US safer? So recently, in Syria, there was a chemical attack against a couple of Syrian citizens, and
I heard about this. The Hindenburg flew right over, dropping the chemicals.
Blame the Germans. But no, there are multiple parties that are blaming whoever. So Russians and Iranians, they're blaming the Israelis, and they think that it was the Israelis who chemically attacked Syrian citizens. A lot of left-wing American media is saying that, or just mainstream media in general is saying that, it must have been Assad bombing his own people, because that makes sense. And finally, we've got a lot of people who are in the centre and on the right, people like independent journalists who think that there's not really much incentive for Assad to chemically attack citizens in Syria who are, essentially, Assad's already won the war against ISIS in collaboration with the United States. So,
I don't know. I can't sort of like I can't commit to either side of the argument, to be honest.
It's certainly not out of character. Assad has chemical weapons.
I think that's the thing they sort of ignore. It's not out of character. I doubt he's a fucking nice bloke, is he?
It's not like it's exactly come out the blue that he is Assad, and he's just he's suddenly using chemical weapons.
Well, the parallels have been that the US has practically won the war against ISIS. They're almost a non-entity, and the US are getting ready to pull out, and supposedly the idea is that the deep state are against that because war means money, and therefore plan the attack, blame Assad, attack Syria.
Per se, I don't think there should be any more involvement with the Middle East. I think
agree with that as well,
the Middle East is a chaotic zone. It is clearly, how long have we been in some conflict or war?
Since 1980 was the first time that there was a...
Do you know, it really seems like quite a non-partisan issue, because you get the left and right pro-war and left and right anti-war, don't you, at the moment? So it's the only major issue that's pretty non-partisan.
Do you reckon it's a authoritarian, libertarian issue?
Yes.
I
guess so. But it really seems to be quite an even split of left and right, of pro and anti-war in this circumstance.
Yeah. Well, the irony of the Middle Eastern conflicts, because if we were to go back, is that it goes absolutely throughout the ages, pretty much since the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Pretty much since the fall of the Ottoman and the death of Lawrence of Arabia, it's pretty much... I thought you were going to say
the fall of the Hindenburg, then.
The fall of once again.
Continue, Connor.
But yeah, if you actually look at the history, it's utterly fucked. It's so fucked. With Saddam, when he was barely keeping things in charge, he was running things as a tyrant. We actually lied, claiming he had nuclear weapons. He didn't have nukes. He was killed. And then the terrorists that we funded against the Russians, they then, obviously, Al-Qaeda, what happens. They launched 9/11. So we go to war in Iraq. We beat them in Iraq. We essentially...
like a proper American.
We're in a war in Iraq.
We essentially we essentially well, I wouldn't say we defeated Al Qaeda, but it then splinters and we end up with an even worse group, obviously ISIS. And I reckon it's obviously just going to continue. It's not going to resolve itself. These places aren't grateful for our involvement. Most people reflect and say, yeah, it was better when Saddam was running the show.
Yeah, I saw a short sort of BBC clip once of a man in some village in Iraq, and he was saying it was the place where that statue of Saddam was torn down, and like he helped tear it down, and he was saying like now he prefers it when Saddam was in charge and all.
I remember watching a documentary, and obviously we gave massive intervention to help bring about Gaddafi's death in Libya. We helped the rebels, and I remember afterwards there was no real media, was there, with Libya? After the fall of Gaddafi, it was just here's the cheering rebels and Gaddafi's death. And don't get me wrong, Gaddafi was a monster. But the thing people don't seem to understand about tyrants and monsters is they're usually tyrants and monsters because they are holding together volatile, dangerous collective groups through their own brutality. They're holding together. It's like, if you think of tyrants as stone walls, I kind of think like a stone wall, and all around them are just dynamite sticks. Because that's how I sort of picture it.
Seems like a good analogy.
And Gaddafi, after his death, all that happened is you had about 12, 13 warring tribes. Literal, like, tribes just shooting, fighting each other non-stop. And the people there, they say, well, we miss Gaddafi. Because at least, even if you're under the heel of these tyrants, there's the duality of evil is, which is worse? To live under a society where you're tyrannically oppressed, or to live under a society which is absolute chaos, where it's a complete lawless, wasteland of roving rape gangs and violence and just death as soon as you walk out the door.
I think difference, I think as terrible as they both are, with the tyrannical side, if you it's not going to be good by any means, but if you stay in line, you can survive. But you're pretty much fucked in anarchy, aren't you?
I mean, the problem we've had a lot with the Middle East is we've gone in, we've overthrown these tyrants. We've left the area completely an unstable mess, and then we fucked off. And obviously there's been no foundations of government set up in place. When you do, there was, going back actually, we're going back thousands of years now. When Julius Caesar was assassinated, it's just a little It's a little interesting parallel. Brutus approached all of the assassins and he said to them, well, as Caesar's been assassinated, all government positions, including yours, are null and void. So I hope you have a plan for government in order. And they didn't. They had absolutely no plan. They didn't think that far ahead.
The result was Brutus and
they had to.
Fighting against
they then
Augustus.
had to. They then, because of their short-sightedness, they then had to reinstate and rely on and allow that the positions Julius Caesar passed, which actually led to their downfall because that meant Julius Caesar's will became legal, which meant he got to crown an heir. Or a successor, I should say.
And then came the first empire.
So again, I just think it shows again, that's an ancient analogy, but that idea of the short-sightedness of the rebel, I think, because it's one thing to tear it down, but what do you do after? If you aren't prepared after you tear something down.
That's the one argument you've got against anarchists. You may be against capitalism and the system and all of that, and this and that and the other, but
what comes after?
It's just what's the next stage?
Yeah. But
I've just started a game at Fortnite. I've landed at Snobby Shores and got 4 kills in the first house.
But what's the next
without
step?
taking
What's
any
the next
hits.
stage?
So-
You've killed them, but how do you
The next
instigate
stage is
order?
complete domination.
You have become Gaddafi.
Yeah, I've got there's a little quote I always heard, and I think it always is important to remember with any sort of people, especially with the Middle East, anything like that. And it's that one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. And I don't think, is there any words I think that could be truer? I'm not quite sure. What are your thoughts, Jake?
It just depends on what you believe in, really, isn't it? It's depends on what approach and what ideology you follow. But anyway, we've kind of drifted away from the topic of the missiles in Syria. So the US Navy is now currently moving towards Syria as we speak. And supposedly Russian fighters have been interrogating some of these boats, just hanging about the scene, just looking to see what they're up to. And it looks possible that there's going to be a strike of some description, unfortunately. I don't think that... I think, well, we're just walking around in circles now with the idea of just pulling out of the region.
In the Middle East. Back in the Middle East.
Should we give Tucker's video a watch?
Go ahead.
Because I think it's a very good video. We'll watch some of it.
I like Tucker more and more, I do.
I just find Tucker goofy. A lot of his stuff is just goofy.
Well, I'm about to start now, so let's see what he has to say.
Carlson tonight. Leaders on both sides of the aisle in Congress, in the media, in our intelligence services, in virtually every overfunded think tank in Washington, have suddenly aligned tonight on a single point of agreement. America must go to war in Syria immediately. Bashar al-Assad cannot continue to lead that country. He must be overthrown. Assad is an evil man, they tell us. His latest crime is a chlorine gas attack carried out over the weekend by his forces against a rebel-held suburb of Damascus. Assad's poison gas suffocated children. Pictures of the aftermath of that are all over the internet, and they are horrifying. Assad is a monster. That's the official story. Almost everyone in power claims to believe it. The push to war in Syria, by the way, has united politicians from both sides. Lindsey Graham and Howard Dean typically agree on very little. Not much at all. But today they are both calling for war in Syria. Graham is demanding massive attacks on the Syrian military. Dean is going even further than that. On Twitter, he called the president, quote, a wimp for merely sending thousands of troops and launching tons of bombs at Syria. That's not enough for Howard Dean, who, as you may remember, once ran for president as the peace candidate. Tonight, he wants total war in Syria. Television pundits, of course, strongly agree. This morning, the foreign policy team over on MSNBC explained that it's far more important for American troops to fight in Syria than it is to secure our own border here in America. Watch.
There's no question that now, all these years later, it is Donald Trump's challenge. He has to take action. He's spoken to Macron. What he ought to do is a coordinated action. There has to be a comprehensive response.
As Trump leaves to fight his imaginary border war, he's leaving the real war where we could make a difference, and said he's turning it over to Assad and to Iran and to ISIS. This is something that Barack Obama wouldn't even do if confronted with these set of facts.
Trump has to take action in Syria. Everyone nods sagely. That ought to make you nervous. Universal bipartisan agreement on anything is usually the first sign that something deeply unwise is about to happen, if only because there is nobody left to ask skeptical questions. And we should be skeptical of this, starting with the poison gas attack itself. All the geniuses tell us that Assad killed those children. But do they really know that? Of course they don't really know that. They're making it up.
Let's pause the video then.
What happened?
It's quite a long bit. So what is so what do you think? Do you think then that it's all a setup, or do you think that?
I think it is. I've thought that for well over a year now. Especially like the last chemical attack was the exact same circumstances, pretty much. Where
has he made any sort of like statement about it?
There's no proof from last year at all. Like,
has he made any public statement?
Not to my knowledge. I mean,
if he's not denying it.
If he's not denying it, that doesn't exactly help his case.
He's bound to deny it, yeah. I mean,
If he has he?
I'll have a look now. But
I didn't hear about it this year or last year. I don't like. Okay, right. I see the point you're trying to make, and I see the point of Tucker and PJW, etc. But at the same time, like, it feels like they're just sticking up for Assad too much. As me and Connor said, I doubt he's a good bloke, and there's a good chance he could have done this. I'm just not certain about it. I'm skeptical for sure.
I'm not sure, but I mean, look, there's I just sort of apply Occam's razor here. What is the simplest answer? Was it a big cover up, or was it more likely that he did just do it? That he did just use the chemical weapons that he's previously used before? It's kind of like with Russia. We acknowledge with the poisoning case, yeah, there's a chance that they didn't poison that ex-KGB guy, but more than likely, they probably did.
Yeah.
So
I think I'm just skeptical, but I mean, it wouldn't fucking shock me if it was Assad. Not at all.
like but even if it was, let's say it was Assad, should we still send a missile strike? Should the US still intervene?
No,
I don't.
No, there's plenty of bad people leading plenty of countries.
I don't believe.
I don't know why we're singling out one. I got against ISIS, yeah, but ISIS are gone now, so it's just another shit country now.
I think
there's no need.
I think as soon as this problem is done, there'll be another problem in the Middle East, and another problem, and another problem, and eventually
the media love it though, don't they? They probably eat it up.
Yeah, it's just throw in the towel. Just acknowledge the Middle East is utter chaos as it stands. You've done the main bit now. ISIS are gone. Gone, but. Now is the time to pull out. Now is the time to just pull out, because the longer it's not going to help sticking around in these countries. They need to be able to govern and build themselves and manage themselves properly.
And
they can't do.
Supposedly,
they can't do that with us.
That's
there.
been the foreign policy, right? Like very recently, supposedly, but.
It is suspicious why they only care about the Middle East, though, isn't it? As there's plenty of dictators across Africa and such.
I remember being told we'd pull out of the Middle East years ago. Years ago now, we were told we'd be out of there, and everyone. Yeah, we. That's going back to the Bush years now. Mission accomplished, everyone. We've won Iraq.
Iraq is ours.
We've done it. But
Iraq. I can't believe you called it Iraq.
Mission accomplished. Don't you laugh at me. Listen, Janzi. I'm going to tell
Trump,
you, okay?
Not Bush.
I'm best. That's not Bush. That's Bush, man.
That was Trump.
You hear the Bush voice. That ain't Trump. Nah, that's the Bush voice.
Stop convincing yourself.
Mission accomplished. Oh no, man.
Trump doesn't say mission accomplished either.
That was an awful Bush impression.
He did. Who can do the Bush?
That was as bad as Spud's Eddie Murphy, and that's pretty bad.
Hey, all right. It's true though. Who can anyone do the mission accomplished bit he did? Can anyone do that line?
I can't do the line, but I could do it better than that, certainly.
No, go. Hang on, I gotta try. We'll try and get it up, just to remind us.
Don't get it up. Don't get it up.
How long ago?
We're flying off track.
How long ago was 2003? 2003, mission accomplished, guys. We're done with the Middle East in 2003.
Long time ago.
Long time no see.
Right, well, that's about everything, I think. I've had enough of hearing about all this dog shit. I want to go shoot things on Fortnite.
Okay.
Hang on, is there any more topics to discuss?
Well, I don't know, might do them spontaneously, but no.
There is one. We need to discuss the Hindenburg disaster.
Yes. It's a major topic.
It needs to be discussed in greater detail.
To be honest, I don't know anything about it. I first heard of it on a meme. The guy, any of you watched Lazy Town?
Yeah. Great show.
Yeah, it was a meme. The evil guy on it who claimed that he put down the Hindenburg or something like that. Something along those lines. But yeah.
That's actually where the line though, because have you ever heard "Oh the Humanity"? That's where it comes. That's where it comes from. That the reporter screamed "Oh the Humanity," And that's where we get the line from. Just a little bit of trivia.
All right. So what year was this?
1937, I think.
All right.
There you go. But yeah, that's everything. All right. Has everyone got any final words or anything?
I'm watching Robbie Rotten cause the Hindenburg disaster.
Oh, that's his name.
Nice
Have you seen
play.
it? Have you found
I'm
the
watching
meme?
it right now.
Hello? Kind of empty.
that Sporticus guy always reminds me of Mr. Sankara.
Yeah, he does, doesn't he?
easy.
I've actually got it up myself.
What is this thing?
What did that guy actually do? He just like gave out sweets or something, and he wanted everyone to be unfit.
Yeah.
Something like that one there.
So.
Worst villain in history.
What a villain. The guy's got the actor's got cancer. Unfortunately.
He didn't just hand out sweets. He brought the Hindenburg down.
For causing the Hindenburg disaster. Jesus.
Just watched him. Man,
maybe it was due to the lack of exercise that he had caused.
Well, that just about summarises the events of the day.
But,
and God bless Robbie Rotten.
Yeah, a hero in his own right.
May he have a speedy recovery.
So.
May he have a speedy recovery so we can bring him to trial for the Hindenburg. Alright, that's a wrap, everyone.
Did you just
Thank
say
you
that's
for listening.
Iraq?
That's a wrap.
That's Iraq, everyone.
That's Iraq.
Right. Well, thank you for listening to the Revanchist podcast. Cheerio.
Bye.
What a Cheerio, pip pip. Mission accomplished.